the lesson last week that we were on. We're going to start a new section.
See,
We were there on 17 talking about Lord of Nature, Lord of Spirit, Lord of Illness. That's the lesson last week that we were on. And we did
Hey,
this
Ed.
week, those. We took care of those. So we
Ed.
changed it. Yes. 6-1.
You guys are really echoey today.
Okay, in a second. Are still echoey?
I don't know. I'll let you know.
Well, I'm
Uh,
talking.
yeah, a little bit. You are a little bit, yeah.
Okay. The microphone anymore.
Sound fine to me.
Okay, yeah, I just made some changes here.
we started in Mark 16, chapter 16.
No, ma'am, that'd be the end of the book. So chapter 6.
6. I need
Yeah,
6.
6,
I need
yeah.
6. Sorry.
And I have my notes here, verses 30 through 56. Is that what you have?
Oh,
I have this one, but I don't know.
Verse 1, okay.
So we just finished with this official's daughter and the woman with blood.
The issues, okay.
Yeah, that was
Kind of like
fine.
Jesus' ministry, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm right here, Jesus' hometown.
Okay.
Yep.
You know, what was the problem with Jesus preaching in his hometown?
Everybody knows him and thinks he's just a carpenter's son and he's just a nobody.
And what was the problem?
Nothing great comes out of
Nazareth.
Nazareth. Yeah.
Nazareth.
And no prophet has ever come out of Nazareth.
Yeah.
Was that true? Because there was one prophet that had come out of Nazareth, except the Jews didn't like him
Oh,
Jesus.
because he had preached in favor of the enemies of the Jews. And God forgave them.
Elijah.
No, well, no. Elijah was a super prophet. They all loved him. Jonah.
Oh, Jonah.
Jonah came out of Nazareth. And Jonah preached in favor of
I didn't know
the
that.
Ninevites, who later eventually came out to be the Babylonians or the Assyrians, and they punished Israel. So they didn't like Jonah. He's never been a real prophet to them, even to this day. At the reading of the prophets and the minor prophets, when they get to the minor prophets, Jonah is always excluded. Yeah. So that is a falsehood when they say that nothing good has ever come out of Nazareth, and that they know that there's no prophet that comes out of Nazareth.
But Jonah was a reluctant prophet.
Yeah. So
I mean, he didn't want to. He didn't want to
well, no,
go.
he didn't want to do that, but still, he was a prophet, and he did the will of God, whether he wanted to or not. Eventually, he did, and we don't know how the story actually ended. Whether he was punished by God or not, but it seems like he did what God wanted him to do, and that's all that really matters. So let's pick up our reading there in Mark, chapter 6. I'll get the gospel writers correctly here shortly. Chapter 6 and verse 1. Jesus went out from them and came into his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And when the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many of the listeners were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? And what is this wisdom given to him? And such miracles as these performed by his hands." So notice the word astonished. And he's doing this on the Sabbath. It was his custom, as well as we read later on in the book of Acts, that it was Paul's custom, and Peter's and the other apostles. It was their custom that whenever they were in a city and the Sabbath came, where were they found?
In the temple.
In the synagogue, in the temple. They were found where religious folk met, where they were supposed to be, and they were teaching. Why would they be in the synagogue teaching on the Sabbath, on a Saturday? They weren't Jews anymore. I mean, they weren't of the Jewish religion anymore. And I'm talking about those in the book of Acts. But why would they be in the synagogue on Sabbath when they weren't Jew of the Jewish religion anymore.
There's so many verses that talk of Christ coming in the Old Testament, and that'd be a real good place to start if you want to convert someone.
It's where the religious people were.
All right, did Paul or Peter, looking at Acts chapter 15 at the Jerusalem Council, did Paul or Peter ever tell the Jewish Christians to abandon their Jewish traditions?
Yeah,
He told them to abandon them,
well, Paul did.
to no longer be circumcised, to no longer practice the Sabbath, to no longer.
Yeah, and so Paul addressed all that stuff.
No, he didn't tell them to abandon them. He told them, don't force people to observe those. Don't force the Gentiles to observe those things. But if you want to do it, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we teach today. We don't go and slam whatever religion they're in. Like when I was taught, I was just taught what was right. And it was in my mind that I went, oh, well, then I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not doing that anymore.
As time went on, you left. And it's
On my own.
It's like I say to my Catholic friends when they become Christians that if they want to continue wearing a head covering, they can. Just don't look down on anyone else that doesn't. If they want to kneel when they pray because that's what they've done all their lives, they can still do that. Just don't think that your prayers are more righteous than other people's. If you want to continue to abstain from eating meats on Fridays, you can please do that if that's what your conscience says for you to do. And so another reason that they would be in the temple on Sabbath is what Kurt says here. And please, anyone out in Zoom land, you can comment on things, is because this is where religious folks were. Jesus is doing this because he is reaching out to the Jews. Keep in mind that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, specifically John and Matthew, are written to illustrate that Jesus is the Son of God, to illustrate or reach out to the Jewish audience. But all of the Gospels is pointing out that Jesus came first to the Jews and then Gentiles, first to the house of Israel. So they were astonished, right? And they're saying this, they're asking this question in verse 3, is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, and Joseph, Judas, and Simon? How many brothers did Jesus have? Half brothers in this passage?
Read.
We'll read it again. James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon.
Oh, four.
Now, I will tell you that Judas, all these four brothers didn't believe in Jesus. They didn't believe that he was the Christ. Not yet. Until after his resurrection. And this Judas fella here, he didn't like his name being Judas after the resurrection, so he changed it to a different name. You know what he changed it to? Well, he wrote one of the shortest epistles in the Bible.
Jude.
He changed it to Jude.
Mine here says Judah,
Yeah,
which just so 4 letters.
Judah. And then his sisters.
Did he change it because of Judas Iscariot?
I would. Would you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
want to be
good.
Hitler. You know, I want
Hey, nobody wants to be.
If you were a girl and your mama decided to name you Jezebel.
That would be good.
Right, so anyway, and then his sisters. How many sisters did Jesus have?
I don't know.
Well, external historians, which are not inspired, say that he had 2, but we don't know for sure. But what I want to illustrate here is that our Catholic friends say that Mary was a perpetual virgin, that she never had sexual relations with her husband, Joseph, which would have been a sin, by the way, because you're not supposed to abstain and keep your husband in limbo. But he had 4 brothers and some sisters here. The Catholics would say that the word brother here means cousin or some type of a relative.
Oh, yeah, they got to lie about that.
Okay, but it doesn't say that here. It says brothers.
How many sisters?
Well, I don't know,
Oh,
but again, some historians would say that he had two, but it's at least two
right.
because it's plural, at least two or more. And let's keep on reading. And they took offense at him. Now, why would they take offense at Jesus? So let's connect verse 2. They were astonished because they're asking, where did the man get these things? And what is this wisdom given to him? And such miracles as these performed by his hands. So these things that they're referring to are the miracles that he's performing, the things that he's saying, because it's so full, his words are so full of wisdom. And then they say, he's just a carpenter's son. We know his father, we know his mother. They come from Nazareth, a hillbilly town. Nothing educated comes from there. So they became offended, or they took offense. Now, the offense here doesn't mean that they became angry or that their feelings were hurt, but they just couldn't get over it. And if you take my words of the phrase couldn't get over it, and think about a ditch or a rock, it means that they stumbled. It was a stumbling block. All right, that's what this means. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and among his own relatives and in his own household. And he could not do miracles there, he could do no miracle there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he wondered at their unbelief, and he was going around around the villages teaching. And he summoned the 12. And began to send them out in pairs and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. And he instructed them that they should take nothing for their journey except a mere staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belt, but to wear sandals. And he added, do not put on 2 tunics. Now, it wasn't that Jesus was worried that they would be mugged, right? It was for another reason. He said to them, wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave town. Any place that does not receive you or listen to you as you go out from there, shake the dust off the soles of your feet for a testimony against them. They went out and preached that man should repent. And they were casting out many demons and were anointing with oil many sick people and healing them. King Herod heard of it, for his name had become well known, and people were saying, John the Baptist has risen from the dead, and that is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. But others were saying, he is Elijah, and others were saying, he is a prophet, and John, whom I beheaded, has risen. For Herod himself had sent and had John arrested and bound in prison on account of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, because he had married her. So, in these first few verses, and we'll talk about Herod and Herodias here in a minute. In these first few verses, we learn that up to this point in the gospel record, Mark is describing isolated incidents of Jesus's preaching and miracles and the various reactions to these. With time, however, his ministry began to expand, and Mark describes to us this development as well as the people's reaction to Jesus's increasing fame. In his hometown, the news of his teaching and miracles reaches people that he knows. And it reaches these people that he knows, people of his hometown, even before Jesus gets there. And the people respond with this skepticism. How can someone from here be doing these great things? Now, it's a different reaction, I think, than what we would have. If somebody from this little town of Waupaca, or from wherever you're listening to us from, from Hewtown or Trafalgar, Indiana, these small little towns, if someone from these small towns makes it to the big time, and we see them on the news saying that from Waupaca, Wisconsin, whatever, Hollywood, or it doesn't matter, something huge and famous and great, we would be proud of that, wouldn't we? Generally, as citizens of this town, we would be very proud, and we would be talking about it, and anybody and everybody, I mean, I tell people that Dr. Pepper comes from Texas. And even the guy, the director of the movie Chosen, you know what he said after the second episode of this new one? That it was made in Texas. Why? Because every Texan knows that the promised land is where? In Texas. And Jesus lived in Texas. Did you see that last part? Or did you leave before? Or have you seen the
No,
second one?
I've seen it, all except the last one,
Well, you should not have left. Stay till after the credits.
just for the last one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything good comes from Texas. Look at me.
There's a TV show that had Waupaca here done, and then that was a big hit.
Yeah, okay. So the point is that they even mention Jesus as a local carpenter's son and one of the many children in a local family. This time it is Jesus who is amazed at their unbelief. Jesus had been amazed at the unbelief of his disciples when they were in the boat. How long will you be like this? But this time he's amazed at the unbelief of his people, of his family, of his friends. And he does very little ministry or very little miracles there, but continues to teach in their synagogues. He was sent to preach the good news, and he does this without many miracles. Now, why do you think that when we go back to verses 4-6, that he was not able to do many miracles there? Did his power leave him? What was happening?
Well, one thing he's stated that he came to not to do his will, but to do the Father's will, right? And even Satan tried to tempt him to jump off the pinnacle, appeal to his pride, everybody can see how spectacular you are if you jump off this, then Jesus said you should not tempt the Lord of God. He quoted scripture, but I think that Jesus wasn't trying to do things just to glorify himself. He just was a servant for his Father.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, I know my nephews, they would start to teach in Bible classes over on Maple Street there. And it was kind of hard for me to listen to them because, wait a minute, that's my little nephew. He should know that. He's smarter than I am. No, he can't do that. And I think that's what's going on here. He's one of us. He can't be smarter than we are.
So is that lack of humility on your part?
Yep.
Yeah. Definitely.
Part of it could be that they, his purpose of the miracles is to prove what's right. And if they aren't going to believe anyway, if they're just going to sign him off as the goofy carpenter's kid, why? Why bother? I don't know if that's a good way to put it.
Yes, that is true. It is a good way to put it. In every other case, every other town that he's been in or village, and he's been performing miracles, the people have been very receptive.
Yeah.
The woman that had the issue of blood,
That's a lot of faith.
all these other ones, the previous lesson that we read, chapter 5, verses 21 through the end of the chapter, the one that was with the demons, he wanted to be with Jesus, and Jesus gave him strict orders. No, go and tell your family, or stay with your family, tell them the great things that the Lord has done for you. The people were receptive. These folks were not receptive. And it doesn't say that they didn't want him there, but when we read this, we understand that they were not going to be interested in what he had to say. They were there more to be critical, and he had nothing to prove to them. Now, we read in other cases where the Pharisees and the Sadducees were critical, and they were there to trap him. But Jesus continues to be there, but because of the other folks that were present, and they were receptive, Jesus continues among them. So then he sends out the 12 on this commission, and we often call it the limited commission. And the other gospels talk about it as well. So there is so much to do that he can only be in one place at one time. So Jesus sends his apostles out to replicate his ministry, to do what he's doing. He gives them the ability to do miracles. He gives them the charge to preach. He gives them instructions concerning their conduct and the ministry. He will provide for them so that they are not to bring extra supplies. And they are to live in the place that will receive them, no begging from door to door. If they are rejected, they are to leave. This is an extremely important phase of training for their future ministry as apostles. Now, I want you to think about how Jesus is instructing them specifically when they go out to preach. They go out 2 by 2. It doesn't say this here, but we read elsewhere where they go out 2 by 2. And then they're not to go begging for food, or money, or for board, the place to stay. They don't have a fundraiser. They don't have a carnivore cakewalk, right? They're not selling anything. They're not raising funds. Why do you think Jesus tells them don't take extra stuff with you? The Lord will,
Fine.
Right,
as he did with Abraham, when?
right.
What did he provide for the Lord? I mean, when did he provide for Abraham?
A sacrifice
Okay.
instead of a son.
And this is something simple. If the Lord didn't provide for them in preaching these few days, I mean, they could easily come back. But this is one of those simple tests that for them might not be simple, but it is really simple. That if they get through this and they have success, it prepares them for the next test. It is a faith growth opportunity. So that when they go out on their own after Jesus dies, they can go back and look. He provided for us. He will do it again. Now we go to Jesus and Herod. So we read a little bit of it. So let's continue reading here this section all the way down to about verse 29. So they're thinking that he might be Elijah, or one of the prophets, or even John the Baptist. And if it's John the Baptist, it really, really scares Herod. And it scares Herod because Herod has a guilty conscience. And Herod had sent out to have John the Baptist arrested, bound in prison on account of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, because he had married her. And John, verse 18, had been saying to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death and could not do so. For Herod was afraid of John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. And when he heard him, he was very perplexed, but he enjoyed listening to him. Kurt, would you read 1 Kings 21:20, please?
Let's see, First Kings, what was that again?
21:20.
21. And Ahab said to Elijah, "Hast thou found me, O mine enemy?" And he answered, "I have found thee, because thou hast sold thyself to work evil in the sight of the Lord."
So when you think about Herod, or Herodias rather here, the wife of Philip, who is now the wife of Herod, his brother. I mean, what a mess. Herodias is the one that plotted to have John the Baptist murdered. Jezebel is one that plotted to have which prophet murdered?
Elijah.
Yeah. So you see a similarity here. Herodias is the Jezebel of the New Testament. Anyway, 21, a strategic day came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his lords and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. And when the daughter of Herodias herself came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. Now, let me make a pause here.
What was he thinking?
Well, let me finish this thought.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, we're guilty of cherry picking verses. And cherry picking verses is when you go and pick cherries, you don't pick all of them, do you?
No, just the good one.
You just pick the
The one I
ones,
want.
the ones you want, the ones that seem good to you. And that's what cherry picking verses means. You just pick the ones that will suit you for whatever you want to prove. And there are many Christians that believe that dancing is a sin. Dancing for any reason, dancing in any place, any occasion is a sin. And they will come to this passage, just like the Jehovah's Witnesses believe that celebrating birthdays are wrong. And they will use this passage. You see, celebrating a birthday, and John the Baptist lost his head. This is why we should not celebrate birthdays. That's cherry picking a passage. Yes, John the Baptist lost his head during this birthday. But that does not mean that we should not celebrate birthdays because of this. This evil man did something evil on a birthday. Just like people do evil things on a wedding. Does that mean we shouldn't have weddings? It's just moronic to think this way. Well, many Christians have been guilty of doing the same thing by going to this passage and saying, you see, this little girl here, or however old she is, was dancing and dancing in a seductive way that made this man think not clearly. And because he was so seduced by her dancing and her sexual moves, lasciviousness, that he went ahead and let them kill John the Baptist. So that's why dancing is wrong. You see how moronic that line of thinking is as well. We should that's not the point of this story anyway. The point of this narrative is something completely different. I warn us against cherry picking verses. Keep on reading. Verse 23, and he swore, rather, verse 22, the last part, ask me for whatever you want and I'll give it to you. And he swore to her, whatever you ask of me, I will give it to you, up to half of my kingdom. And she went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? And she said, the head of John the Baptist. And immediately she came in a hurry to the king and asked, saying, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And although the king was very sorry, yet because of his oaths and because of this dinner guest, he was unwilling to refuse her. Immediately the king sent an executioner, commanded him to bring back his head. And he went out and had him beheaded in the prison. And he brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard about this, they came and took away his body and laid it in a tomb. The apostles gathered with Jesus, and they reported to him that all that they had done and taught. And he said to him, come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest for a while. For there they were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. And they went away in a boat and to a secluded place by themselves. So let's go to verse 30. Work backwards here for a little bit. The apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. You know, it's interesting that Mark, which Peter's the one that's telling Mark this, doesn't tell us all that they had done. It just tells us they gathered Jesus and they told him everything that had happened. That's it. I want to know what happened, don't you? So let's read what happened. Let's go to Matthew chapter 6.
Oh, Matthew 6.
In verse 1. What's that say? Rob?
Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as hypocrites do in the synagogue, in the streets, and when they are honored by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father will see what is done in secret and
All right,
reward
you
you.
can stop there. But what did they do?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, right?
They would have been patting themselves on the back.
But did they do something good?
I'm sure
Did they have success?
Yeah, they
Doesn't
sounded
say
happy
it,
about it.
but I'm sure they did.
It seems like it, right?
Sure sound like they're happy about it.
Yeah, I think they had quite a bit of success.
But I think it was just a big learning,
That was the point, wasn't it?
because they didn't know how to teach before that. They'd never taught before that.
Look at the paradox. In his hometown, he's nothing but a carpenter's son. What does he know? But yet they were impressed and amazed at how much wisdom he had and the miracles that he could perform. Now he sends these who are fishermen, tax collector, and they did the same that Jesus did, because he gave them the power to do miracles. He gave them the ability to do all these things. But we don't know how much success they had yet. They're going to go again and do this at another time. And when they go and do it at another time, they come back and Jesus says, you don't need to tell me what kind of success you had, because before you even came back here, I saw the devil being cast out. That's how much success they had. All right. But what we do learn is that they were obedient. Notice that before, when they were on the boat, they were afraid. Don't you care that we're going to die? Where's your faith? This time, when he sends them on this preaching ministry, we don't see that any of them complain and say, wait a second, what, no money, no belt, no tunics, no food. What if? No one seemed to question it. They just went. So are they showing some growth? Yeah. That's all we really need to know. All right. So these 5,000 here that, or rather, well, let's talk a little bit more. Herod Antipas, we know who he was. The President Herod was the son of the king who had the children in Bethlehem and the surrounding area killed when Jesus was born. Remember that? Jesus was born. They told him that in Matthew 2, verse 16, I think, thereabouts. And I think you're going to find out if I'm right or wrong, aren't you, Kurt?
No, I wasn't.
Matthew 2:16.
Oh, that'd be good.
He found out that Jesus was the king, and he was afraid that he was going to be the physical king and take him out of his place. So he said, every child that's 2 and younger, male child 2 and younger, that have him killed, very similar to Moses. Okay, so it's right, and so Jesus' parents and Jesus moved to Egypt, which is quite interesting. And the prophecy said that out of Egypt came the Savior. And Herod Antipas had abandoned his wife and eloped with Herodias, who was already married at the time to his brother Philip, while visiting Rome. And John the Baptist denounced this union, and in so doing threatened Herodias' position as a queen. What business of it was it for John the Baptist to meddle into this man's affairs? Sometimes you just need to keep your mouth shut. No, he didn't. He saw wrong and he spoke about the wrong. And so Herod send him in prison. That's the only way to keep his mouth shut, he thought. But I'm sure that John the Baptist continued to speak, and we find that this woman was scorned. And what is that? The hell has no fury
As a woman's.
as a woman scorned. So she said, I want his head. And she got it on a silver platter. Mark uses this flashback to introduce an important character of that era, and also to describe the circumstances that brought to an end the ministry of John the Baptist. No more John the Baptist. No more the baptism of John. No more the disciples of John. John had to decrease in order for Jesus to increase. And the way that John decreased here was by him losing his head. This is also the way to explain the growth of Jesus's ministry. This is the way Peter decides to introduce us to those facts. So then we read there in verses 30 through around the end of the chapter that the Gospels of Matthew and John record long passages where Jesus is actually teaching his apostles. They include much dialogue containing questions and answers between them. Mark's approach is to show Jesus teaching his chosen apostles by doing, by giving examples, by sending them out to minister and then receiving the responses. So we have examples of this in these verses 30 through 56. So there's this retreat. Come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest for a while. And there were many people coming and going. That's verses 30 through 32. So upon the return from their first tour of ministry, the Lord tries to bring the apostles away for rest and refreshment. And Mark tells us that they are eager to report everything that they did. And they did. We just don't know. So verse 33, I guess the people also realized everything that they had done, or a lot of the things that they had done, because there's a rally. And in this rally, 5,000 people are fed. Well, more than 5,000. And I am sure that it was a lot more than 5,000. And this is how I know. Here the Bible tells us that 5,000 men were fed. I doubt that it's only 5,000 men that were present. The people saw them going in. Many people recognized them and ran together on foot from all the cities and got there ahead of them. And when Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And began to teach them many things. And when it was already quite late, his disciples came to him and said, this place is desolate and it is already quite late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding countryside and villages to buy themselves something to eat. Who wanted to send them away to the grocery store?
Disciples.
No Piggly Wiggly, right? So going to the surrounding countryside and villages to buy themselves something to eat. But Jesus said, no, you give them something to eat. What they say.
They just have little bread and some.
Well, they said, shall we go and spend 200 denarii on bread and give them something to eat? But when Jesus says, you give them something to eat, they're thinking, so you want us to go, you want us to go. I mean, us 12. To the surrounding cities and villages and buy bread.
And 5 loaves and 2 fishes.
Well, but Jesus then asked them what they have already on hand. But they're thinking,
That's what they can afford.
200 denarii and buy bread.
Mhm.
And when they haul it all.
Well, yeah, for all these people.
How much would that be?
Well, quite a bit. Right?
Yeah.
And so Jesus says, well, what did you 12 just, where did you come from? Where did you just come from? What did you just do? You perform miracles. He doesn't literally tell them that, but that's what they did. You just perform miracles. And you're worried about feeding these people? Well, all right. How many loaves do you have? Go look.
It's worse.
They found out 5 and 2 fish. So Jesus said, all right, well, they have them sit down by groups on the green grass. They sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before them. And he divided up the 2 fish among them all. So who passed out the food? Who handed out the food?
Disciples.
Why the disciples? Why didn't they pick people from the crowd and have them be the servers? Why the disciples?
They need to learn. Need to see this happening firsthand.
When would they serve tables again?
Yeah.
Well, this happens again, right?
Yeah.
And after that, when would they serve tables again? In the book of Acts.
Down there, the Grecian women that were
Yes.
be taken care of.
They had been serving tables, and then they said, we just can't do this on our own anymore. We need help because our main concern is to teach. So they selected 7 men of good reputation. Stephen was one of them.
And I kind of wonder if when he said, hey, feed them, they might have been thinking, taking the money going to town, they might have been thinking, why us? We're busy, we're doing this. Send a bunch of them people out, let them do it.
Well, probably so, yeah. It could have been. So he kept giving them to the disciples, and then look at verse 42. They all ate and were satisfied. The word satisfied. What does that mean?
They're full.
They were
They
full.
were full, ain't enough.
Well,
They couldn't eat anymore.
they had enough.
They had
They were
enough.
content.
Content?
Yes.
Because we always.
They couldn't eat anymore because they were satisfied.
We're
Not so.
satisfied where we could eat half of what we eat
Comfortable.
and still be satisfied.
All right. So maybe not full as a tick.
Satisfied. I can't eat too much, because then I'm not sad, I'm too full. I don't like that.
Well, they had enough.
It was like a Thanksgiving dinner, everybody had enough.
No, Thanksgiving dinner, you're stuffed.
Your stuff.
They had enough, and they
You
had
did it right.
leftovers.
Yeah, but
So there's another teaching opportunity here. The disciples themselves passed out the food so that they could see that from how many loaves of bread
5,
and how many fish,
2,
they could see that this truly was a miracle. And that everyone ate until they had enough. The miracle continues. And that they had enough left over to fill how many baskets?
12,
Does it say that here?
right?
Yeah. Well, full basket.
Full, yeah.
And the miracle continues.
Mhm.
Verse 43, they picked up 12 full baskets of the broken pieces and also of the fish, and they were 5,000 men who ate loaves. Now, just for as a math exercise, Kurt, why don't you look at Matthew 14:22 up, please, and give a skim through 22:33, see if you find
A different version.
any things that we missed.
Where was I going and where?
Matthew 14, 22 through 33. So if each one of these men had a wife, how many people is that now?
10,000.
Now, you're supposed to be looking for other things that we might have missed.
Matthew 14:22.
Yeah, 33. So just look for it, just
Okay.
skip. All right, so if each one of these men had a wife, that's how many men now? How many people? 10. And if each of these couples had 2 children, how many people is that now?
20. 20.
So we're just doing a guesstimate, right?
Says they were filled, but they took out 12 baskets.
All right, so they were filled.
Yep, filled.
That's a lot.
But factually, we know there were 5,000 people there.
Mhm.
Yeah, 5,000 men beside women and children.
beside women and children.
Beside women.
Now we know that there were women and children. So can you imagine, out of 5 loaves and 2 fish, approximately 20,000 people ate and they were filled?
That was 14:21, Matthew 14:21.
I'm making a big to-do about this because of the next section,
Walking on water.
walking on water. Walking on water. Now, let's not, we're gonna have to go back here and Mark. Because we might, we need to make a connection. In verse 3, they're asking, is this not the carpenter's son? That's one. Who is this man? Well, the carpenter's son. He's a nobody. All right. In verses 14 through about 17, who is he? One of the prophets, Elijah, or maybe even John the Baptist. Who is he? People are trying to identify who Jesus is, although they know, they refuse to accept him as, because they say, well, no one can speak with this wisdom or perform these miracles unless he is the Son of God, unless he comes from heaven. But they're refusing to accept this. So he must be an ignorant guy from Nazareth, a carpenter's son. We know his brothers and sisters. We know his dad and his mom. And we know his uncles and we know all that. Well, he must be one of the prophets. I mean, he can't be God, Son of God, Elijah, or maybe the resurrected John the Baptist. And Herod's scared. But then this one who is a nobody has just performed one of the most amazing miracles. After he sends his 12 and they perform miracles, one of the greatest miracles of feeding about approximately 20,000 people, for sure 5,000 out of 5 loaves and 2 fish. And now, verse 45. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of Bethsaida while he himself was sending the crowd away. What did they do with the 12 baskets of bread?
Maybe he took it home.
We don't know,
Right.
but they gathered it. We don't know what they did with it. But I know what they did not do with it. Right here. After bidding them farewell, he left for the mountain to pray, and when it was evening, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. And seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the 4th watch of the night, around 3 to 6 a.m., he came to them walking on the sea, and he intended to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed that it was a ghost and cried out, for they saw him and were terrified. But immediately they spoke with him and said, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished.
33.
33. You have your mic on, John. Tell me verse 51 now. 52, for they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. What does that mean? They had not gained any insight from the loaves. I have here on the side of my Bible, verse 52, they were lacking in faith. Verse 53. That's it. We'll stop there.
Like you said earlier, they had already had all the miracles that happened when they were out. And then they come here and there's the fish, so that's another one. And so this is like the 3rd thing, and by now you think they're gonna get used to him doing out of the ordinary.
Jesus feeds the people in 2 different ways. The physical way and the spiritual way. He feeds them spiritual food by teaching, right? By multiplying the fish and the bread. That's a supernatural way. And then he feeds them the natural way by the spiritual food in a natural way by preaching. And he's teaching the apostles two important lessons here. Humans have both physical and spiritual needs that the apostles must satisfy as ministers. And Jesus can fulfill both needs because with him, there is always more than enough. Without him, there were only 5 loaves and 2 fish. But with him, there was more than enough. The apostles have ministered and done miracles on their first preaching tour. But Jesus reminds them that the source of these things is not by themselves, it is by Jesus. Then this business of walking on water, despite the miracles that they had seen and the miracles that they had performed, in this scene, the apostles demonstrate that they were slow learners. Now let's think about this. They had not gained any insight. Another narrative tells us that Jesus tells them, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. And then they say, hey,
We should have brought some.
hey, Peter, John, did you bring any bread? No. You hear him? He said, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and he's upset with us because we didn't bring any of that leftover bread. And then Peter here in Mark says, we didn't gain any insight from the miracle. What was Jesus talking about when he says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod? Of who Jesus is. Some were saying he's just a carpenter's son. He's a nobody. He's a prophet or John the Baptist. Because when we get to Matthew, Matthew 16, who do people say that I am? What did Peter and the rest of the apostles say? Some say that you are
John the Baptist.
Elijah or some other. And then Jesus says, okay, we got that established. But I want to know, who do you say that I am? How far has your faith progressed? And Peter and the rest, because it wasn't just Peter who said this, but Peter and the rest confessed, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And they finally gained insight from the fish and the loaves.
They must have,
Mhm.
I don't think so. To a point,
Yeah.
to a
To a
point,
point.
yeah.
Well, they
Because-
confessed.
because they didn't really put 2 and 2 together until after his resurrection.
Yeah. Well, completely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But it's growing.
yeah.
That's what I want us to see.
Yeah.
That every single day for those 3.5 years, their faith is growing and growing and growing. Because even Thomas, unless I see, unless I touch, and he saw him, my Lord, my God, right? So their faith was not completely solidified until Acts 2,
Yeah, that's, yeah.
right? Until Acts 2, when the Spirit comes but it's growing, it's growing. And we see that they passed the test there in Matthew 16, when they confess that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. But verse 53, they do some more miracles here. And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored to the shore. And when they got out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him and ran about that whole country, began to carry here and there on their pallets those who were sick to the place they heard he was. This is much different than when he was in his hometown, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wherever he entered villages or cities or countryside, they were laying the sick in the marketplaces and imploring him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak. And as many as touched it were being cured. Why do you think, or do you think they might have heard that just touching the fringe of his cloak, they could be healed from the incident with that woman that had the issue of blood?
Could be,
Even though he would often tell people to tell no one.
right? But they always told somebody.
Yeah.
Goes for
Just
now.
like we would do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
If somebody healed me, boy, you better believe I
Gets
get
around.
Now, after this point in Mark's gospel, Jesus will perform fewer miracles. The next two chapters will describe more of the confrontations that he has with his enemies and the final key miracles that he will perform. But the bulk of the teaching will now focus on preparing his disciples to understand and accept two great things, two great truths. Here it is. His true identity, the Son of God and Messiah, and his true mission, the cross. So the next or the rest of the gospel will focus on two great truths. His true identity as the Son of God and Messiah, and his true mission, the cross. And that's where we end. Anyone have a question or a comment you'd like to make or add?
Yes,
Yes,
I remember in the verse, one of the verses in Matthew or Mark they asked Jesus, "Are you the son of David or are you the son of Cephas?"
Okay. People always wanted to know, but rarely accepted who he was.
Right.
And wasn't it Pontius Pilate who said, are you the king of the Jews? I mean, they're accusing you of that. Is that who you are? And Jesus said, well, you said it. And still, he was killed. Next week, next Thursday, we will not meet. If things go the way I'm hoping they go, I will not be here. I'll be in Georgia for a wedding. But if I'm not able to make it to Georgia, then we'll be here. I'll just let you know for a fact, for sure, here in the next few days through a text or an email or a post. Thank you for being with me today.
thank
And as
you.
always, may God bless us, bless the church, and bless everyone that we come into contact with when we speak the word of God today.